I asked my son and daughter-in-law a simple question. When is the wedding? My daughter-in-law didn't even look up from her phone. She popped a piece of the expensive ribeye I paid for into her mouth and delivered the line that would ruin her life. We got married yesterday, Dad. It was just for special people. You wouldn't have fit in. I sat there, stunned, in the $8,500 a month penthouse I was funding, realizing I was just a wallet with a pulse. 1 week later, she called me screaming. The rent is overdue. The landlord sent a notice. Did you transfer the money yet? If you've ever had to remind someone exactly who holds the keys to the castle, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because I gripped the phone, felt a cold smile spread across my face, and whispered, "Didn't I tell you? I'm just a rustic old man. I don't know how to pay rent for special people." Let me take you back to the moment the silver knife slipped and cut the silence. The silver knife slipped. It screeched against the fine porcelain plate, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the silence of the penthouse. Scritch. I winced, but I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on my hands. They were resting on the cold glass table, looking like foreign objects. They were large, rough hands, with calluses that 45 years of pouring concrete and bending rebar had never quite washed away. Against the pristine white tablecloth, they looked like dirty stones. I sat at the head of the table, but I didn't feel like a king. I felt like a ghost haunting my own property. The air conditioning hummed, a low, artificial breeze that made the room feel sterile. My son, Brandon, refused to meet my gaze. He stared into his wine glass as if the dark red liquid held the secrets of the universe. He looked terrified. His shoulders were hunched, protecting his chest, a posture he had adopted since he was a boy whenever he knew he was in trouble. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, was different. She didn't look terrified. She didn't even look up. Her face was bathed in the pale blue glow of her smartphone. Her thumb moved with a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Swipe, swipe, swipe. She was physically present in the dining room, sitting on a chair I had paid for, eating a steak I had bought. But her mind was miles away, lost in a digital world of influencers and social climbers. I cleared my throat. In the quiet room, it sounded like a crack of thunder. I asked a simple question, I said. My voice was calm. I have spent my life negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts and staring down union bosses. I know how to keep my voice steady even when my heart is hammering against my ribs. But tonight, the hammer was hitting hard. When is the wedding? I needed to know. The uncertainty was an itch I couldn't scratch. Uncle Steve needs to book his flight from Ohio, I added, trying to sound practical, trying to sound like a father who just wanted to help. Ticket prices are going up. If we don't book by Tuesday, the rates double. I waited. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Brandon flinched. His hand shook, and a single drop of red wine splashed over the rim of his glass. It landed on the white tablecloth, blooming like a small, fresh wound. He looked at his wife, his eyes wide and pleading. He was begging her to speak. He was begging her to save him. Jessica finally stopped scrolling. She didn't put the phone down, though. She just lowered it slightly. She picked up her fork, stabbed a piece of the expensive ribeye, and popped it into her mouth. She chewed slowly, deliberately. She was making me wait. She was asserting dominance in my own house. Finally, she swallowed. She looked at me, and her eyes were bored, dead. There was no warmth in them, no spark of family connection. "We got married yesterday, Dad," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. It was the tone you use to tell a stranger the time. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic of Chicago, the beat of my own heart, it all went silent. I blinked, trying to process the syntax of her sentence. "Yesterday?" I whispered. "Saturday," she corrected, inspecting her manicured fingernails. "At the Ritz-Carlton." She took a sip of wine, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim. I looked at my son, my boy, the kid I had carried on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. "Brandon?" I asked. "Is this true?" I wanted him to deny it. I needed him to laugh and say it was a joke. I needed him to be my son. He looked down at his lap, unable to witness the damage he had caused. "It was a small ceremony, Dad," he murmured. His voice was a whisper, fragile and weak. "Small?" Jessica laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound, like glass breaking on a tile floor. "It wasn't small, Brandon. Stop lying." She turned her gaze back to me. Her eyes were like ice chips. "It was elegant, Arthur. We had the ballroom, the orchestra. It was beautiful. The ballroom, I repeated. But you said it was small. It was just for special people, she said, cutting me off. The kind of crowd that appreciates high society. The kind of crowd that matters. Special people. The words hit me in the chest. I felt a physical pain, a tightness behind my sternum. Special people, I asked slowly, and I am not special? Jessica sighed, an exaggerated sound of annoyance. She waved her fork at me, gesturing at my flannel shirt. You know how you are, she said dismissively. You would have felt out of place. You're rustic. You wouldn't have known anyone. You wouldn't have fit in. You wouldn't have fit in, she repeated, driving the nail deeper. We did it for you, really, to save you the embarrassment. She smiled then. It wasn't a kind smile. It was toxic. It was a smile that said she knew exactly where to hurt me, and she enjoyed doing it. I sat there, stunned. I pay for this apartment. I pay the $8,500 rent every single month so they can live in the loop. I bought the steak she was digesting. I paid for the college degree Brandon never uses. But I wasn't special enough to see them say I do. I felt something crack inside me. It wasn't a bone. It was something deeper. It was a structural fracture in the foundation of my life. The load-bearing wall of my love for them had just buckled. I see, I whispered. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly on the floor, a harsh sound of finality. You're leaving? Brandon asked. He looked up, and I saw relief in his eyes. He was glad the interrogation was over. You haven't finished dinner. I'm not hungry, I said. I walked to the door. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet concrete. I reached for the handle. I didn't slam it. I didn't scream. I just closed it softly. Click. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening. I expected them to come after me. I expected Brandon to open the door and apologize. But there was only silence. As I walked down the long carpeted hall toward the elevator, I realized something. The pain was shifting. It was turning from grief into something colder, something harder. They didn't just break my heart, they broke the contract. In the construction business, when you break a contract, there are penalties, severe penalties. And the penalties were about to begin. I stepped out of the building and into the cool Chicago night. The wind coming off the lake was sharp, biting at my exposed face, but it felt honest. Unlike the air in the penthouse, this cold didn't pretend to be anything else. I didn't go home. My empty house in the suburbs felt too big right now. Too full of echoes. Too full of memories of a little boy who used to run to the door when I came home from a job site, smelling of dust and diesel. That boy was gone. I drove south. The city changed around me. The glass towers of the loop gave way to brick and mortar, to neighborhoods that had seen better days. I pulled into a small diner on 35th Street. It was the kind of place where the menu is laminated and sticky, and the coffee tastes like battery acid. The red vinyl seats were patched with silver duct tape. But as I slid into a booth in the back, I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding. It felt more like home than that penthouse ever did. Katie, the waitress, walked over. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her uniform was wrinkled. She was working her second shift of the day, trying to put herself through nursing school. Refill, Mr. Arthur? She asked. She held the coffee pot with a steady hand, despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Please, Katie, I said. She poured the black liquid. Steam rose up, swirling in the yellow light. You okay, hon? She asked softly. You look like you went 10 rounds with a cement mixer. Just a long night, Katie, I said. Just a long night. She nodded, respecting the boundary, and walked away to wipe down the counter. I watched her go. She worked harder in one shift than Jessica had worked in her entire life. My phone buzzed on the table. The sound was angry against the Formica top. I looked at the screen. It was a text from my brother, Uncle Steve. Steve? Arthur, did you see the photos? I frowned. My thumb hovered over the screen. My hands stiff. Arthur, what photos? 3 dots appeared. Then an image loaded. It was a screenshot from Instagram. My heart gave a strange, painful thud. It was Jessica. She was wearing a white dress that must have cost a fortune. silk, lace, tailored to perfection. She was holding a flute of champagne, throwing her head back in a laugh that looked practiced. She was standing next to a man, but it wasn't Brandon. The man was tall, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. My blood ran cold. The diner noise faded away. It was Marcus Thorne. I felt a wave of nausea. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a guest. He was a shark in a suit. 10 years ago, he had tried to bankrupt me. He had tried to hostile take over one of my biggest developments, using dirty tactics and lawsuits to bleed me dry. I had fought him off, but it cost me millions in years of stress. Why was my daughter-in-law posing with my sworn enemy on her wedding day? I zoomed in on the photo. I looked at the caption, "To New Beginnings and Endless Capital," and a power couple. I put the phone down face first. My hand was shaking. The coffee in my cup rippled. This wasn't just a snub. This wasn't just a rude daughter-in-law. This was a betrayal. There was a rot in the foundation of my family, deeper than I had imagined. It was termites in the wood, eaten until the wall collapses. 3 days later, I was sitting in my real office, top floor of the Miller building, glass and steel. From here, the people below looked like ants. This was my fortress. Here, I wasn't a lonely old father. I was the chairman. My secretary, Elena, walked in. She has been with me for 20 years. She knows where all the bodies are buried. She knows my coffee order, my schedule, and my moods better than I do. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "We have a problem with Unit 41. Unit 41. The penthouse." I swiveled my chair around. "What is it, Elena?" "The tenants are requesting a transfer," she said, looking down at her clipboard. "They say the rent is overdue, and they are requesting the funds be released immediately." "They want the rent money?" I asked. "Yes, sir. $9,500. I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dry as dust, scraping my throat. "They want me to pay the rent?" I asked, leaning back. "For the apartment I wasn't invited to? For the home where I am treated like a stranger?" The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its selfishness. Elena raised an eyebrow. She didn't like them. She never had. "They marked the request urgent," she said. Jessica sent a note attached to the invoice. She handed me a piece of paper. Note, "Dad, funds are tight after the wedding. Don't be late. The landlord is aggressive." I stared at the paper. The landlord, he was talking about me. She just didn't know it. I owned the holding company that owned the building. To her, the landlord was just a faceless corporation. She could bully. I looked at the checkbook on my desk. The blue leather cover was worn smooth. I picked up my pen. It was a heavy fountain pen, a gift from my late wife. I hovered the pen over the check. I could write it. It was just money. I had plenty of it. I could write the check, smooth things over, and pretend that everything was fine. I could go back to being the good dad, the quiet wallet in the corner. Then I thought of the photo. I thought of Marcus Thorne's predatory smile. I thought of Brandon staring at his lap while his wife humiliated me. To New Beginnings and Endless Capital. I put the pen down. "Elena," I said. "Yes, sir?" "Don't send the money." Elena smiled. It was a shark smile, sharp and satisfied. "Understood," she said. "And Elena, sir, call Karen." Karen was my lawyer, and she was the best in the city. "I need to review the lease," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "And I need to review my will." Elena nodded and turned to leave. I turned back to the window. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city. The shadows were growing longer in my life, too. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt like I was pouring concrete. I was setting a foundation. But this time, I wasn't building a shelter for them. I was building a wall. 1 week later, the silence broke. I was in my study at home, staring at the rain streaking against the window pane. The glass was cold to the touch. Outside, the oak trees were swaying violently, their branches stripped bare by the wind. It was a gray, miserable day, the kind of day where old injuries ache. My back, stiff from years of hauling lumber, throbbed in rhythm with the storm. My phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It shrilled, vibrating aggressively on the mahogany desk. The screen flashed Jessica. I let it ring 3 times. 1, 2, 3. I took a sip of my coffee, preparing myself. Then I answered, "Hello? Arthur, what is wrong with you?" She didn't say hello. Her voice was a screech, sharp enough to cut glass. It was high-pitched, laced with a panic I had never heard from her before. I held the phone away from my ear, wincing. "Hello to you too, Jessica. The landlord sent a notice," she screamed. "A delinquency notice. It was taped to our door like we're common criminals." I could hear her pacing, the click-clack of her heels on the hardwood floors. My hardwood floors echoed through the receiver. "The rent is overdue," she yelled, her voice trembling with rage. "Did you transfer the money? You said you would handle the overhead." I leaned back in my leather chair. I looked at the rain. "I'm afraid not," I said. My voice was steady, contrasting her hysteria. There was a silence on the line, a thick, heavy pause. Then a gasp. "What do you mean, not?" "I mean, things are tight," I lied. I let my voice crack just a little. I made myself sound older, frailer. "The economy, the markets are down. My pension isn't what it used to be, Jessica." I waited. I wanted to see if there was any empathy, any concern for the man they treated as a bank vault. "You have to be kidding me," she hissed. The venom in her voice was palpable. "It's $9,050. Arthur, you have savings. You have investments. Dig into them." "I thought you were successful entrepreneurs," I countered softly. "Brandon is a self-made man, isn't he?" "That's what he tells his friends." I was throwing their own lies back at them. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "We have a reputation to maintain. If we get evicted, if people see a notice on our door, it ruins everything. Do you understand? Everything." She didn't care about me. She cared about the optics. "Maybe you should ask your special people for a loan," I suggested. "Dad," it was Brandon's voice. He must have snatched the phone. He sounded breathless, desperate. "Dad, please," he begged. We can't pay it." "Why not?" I asked. "You just had a wedding at the Ritz." "That's exactly why," he cried. "We spent everything on the wedding. We are tapped out. We are broke, Dad." "Broke?" I repeated. But Jessica said the wedding was small, intimate. Expenses added up," Brandon stammered. I could hear the fear in his throat. He was drowning, and he expected me to be the life raft. "Again? I'll see what I can do," I said, my voice non-committal. "Dad, you have to." I hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the dial tone. Broke. They had blown through everything. I didn't check my bank account. I didn't call the bank. Instead, I picked up the landline and dialed a different number. "Alina," I said when she picked up. "Yes, Arthur. I need you to find out something. I need to know exactly how much that wedding cost." "Every dime. I'm on it," she said. "And Alina?" I paused, feeling a heaviness in my chest. "Find out who paid for it. I have a suspicion." 2 hours later, I was back in the city office. The rain was hammering against the glass walls, now turning the Chicago skyline into a blurry watercolor painting. Alina walked in. She didn't knock. She held a black folder in her hands, and her face was grim. She looked like a doctor coming to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "You're not going to like this, Arthur." She placed the folder on my desk. She opened it. Copies of invoices spilled out like autumn leaves. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom rental. A 5-course meal for 300 guests. Imported orchids from South America. A live swing band. I scanned the totals. My eyes watered, but not from tears. Total cost $250,000. "They spent $250,000, I whispered. "On a party?" That was more than my father made in his entire life. That was 5 years of college tuition. "That's not the worst part," Elena said softly. She reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a credit card receipt. "Look at the card number, Arthur." So I put on my reading glasses. I leaned in. The last 4 digits were familiar. 8842. It wasn't Brandon's card. It wasn't Jessica's. It was a Miller Holdings corporate card. My hand froze. 5 years ago, I had given Brandon an emergency card. It was for life or death situations only. DIL money, emergency surgery, a flight home from a war zone. He had used it to pay for the champagne. He had used it to pay for the band that played while they laughed at me. My vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt. He stole from me. He didn't just borrow. He embezzled. He used my own money to finance the very event where I was excluded. He used my money to impress Marcus Thorne. I felt that crack in my chest widen. It was a deep, jagged fracture now. The support beams had snapped. He signed for it, Elena said quietly. He forged your signature on the authorization form. I stared at the scribbled signature. It was a clumsy imitation of my own. I closed the letter. I placed my hand on top of it, feeling the cold smoothness of the paper. Cancel the card, I said. My voice sounded dead, like it belonged to someone else. Already done, Elena said. I flagged it as fraud. Good. I looked up at her. And Elena? Yes, sir? Prepare the eviction notices. I turned to look out at the storm. For real this time. No more warnings. Arthur, Elena said, her voice hesitant. Are you sure? He's your son? I looked at the reflection of my face in the dark window. I looked old. I looked tired. But my eyes were hard. He ceased to be my son the moment he stole from me to please strangers, I said. Now he is just a tenant. A delinquent tenant. File the papers, Elena. I needed to see them. I didn't want to rely on invoices or phone calls. I needed to look my son in the eye and see if there was anything left of the boy I raised, or if he was completely gone. I drove to the building on Lake Shore Drive. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the streetlights like oil. I parked my truck around the back. In the maintenance bay, I didn't park in the VIP spots. I didn't want them to see my car. I took the service elevator up. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and steel. The lift rattled as it climbed 41 stories, a stark contrast to the silent, velvet-lined passenger elevator in the lobby. I had my master keyring on my belt. It was heavy. It held the keys to every door in the building. I stepped out onto the 41st floor service landing. There was a heavy steel door that led into the back hallway of the penthouse. I reached for the lock. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, twisting the key harder. Metal scraped against metal, but the tumbler didn't catch. I pulled the key out and leaned in close. The lock cylinder was gone. In its place was a sleek black glass panel, a biometric smart lock. A red light pulsed in the center like a heartbeat. They had changed the locks. I stood in the hallway of my own building, locked out. They had modified the structure without a permit. They had barred the owner from entering. I raised my hand to knock. I was going to pound on that door until the hinges shook. I was going to demand answers. Then I heard voices. The service door wasn't airtight, and the inner door leading to the kitchen must have been open. The sound drifted out into the quiet service hall. Laughter, the clink of expensive crystal. Oh my God, Jessica's voice floated through the steel. You should have heard him on the phone. He sounded so pathetic. My fist froze inches from the metal. My stomach twisted into a knot. He actually said he was broke, she giggled. Can you believe it? The man sits on a mountain of assets and cries poverty. Old fool, she added. I leaned my forehead against the cold door. I closed my eyes. Don't worry, babe, Brandon's voice answered. It was slurred. He was drunk. He'll pay. He always pays. He's desperate for us to like him, Brandon continued. He's terrified of being alone. I just have to look sad, and the checkbook opens. He's just a mobile wallet, Jessica sneered. That's all he is, a walking checkbook with a bad haircut. A mobile wallet. The words burned. They branded themselves into my mind. Then a third voice spoke, a deep, smooth baritone that I recognized instantly. And if he cuts you off, it was Marcus Thorne. He was in my apartment. He was drinking my wine. He won't, Jessica said confidently. He's too soft. He's sentimental. He'll die alone in that big suburban house if we don't visit him, and he knows it. We are his oxygen. He's a lonely old man, she finished. We own him. I stood there in the dark hallway. Too soft. Die alone. Mobile wallet. Something inside me died right then. The hope. The fatherly love that makes excuses. The patience that parents hold on to for decades. It all turned to ash. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. I lowered my hand. I looked at the red light on the smart lock. It blinked at me. Access denied. You're right, I whispered to the empty hallway. I was too soft. I turned around. I walked back to the service elevator. My boots made no sound on the concrete floor. I pressed the button as the heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of their laughter. I felt a strange transformation. The grief evaporated. The sadness hardened into cold, gray resolve. I wasn't Arthur the father anymore. I wasn't the lonely old man. I was Arthur Miller, the chairman. I was the man who built skyscrapers from mud. I was the man who crushed union strikes and outmaneuvered sharks like Marcus Thorne. They wanted a landlord? They were about to get one, and I had work to do. I went straight to Karen's office. Karen Davis is the best real estate attorney in Chicago. She is also the only person left who calls me by my first name without wanting something. Her office is on the 20th floor, smelling of old paper and expensive leather. I walked in without knocking. Karen looked up from her laptop. She took one look at my face, gray, set in stone, eyes hollow, and she closed the computer. Sit down, Arthur, she said softly. I remained standing. I felt too restless to sit. If I sat down, I might never get back up. I want them out, I said. Unit 41. Immediately, Karen sighed, taking off her glasses. We have to follow protocol, Arthur. The law is the law. We need a 3-day notice for non-payment. Then we file for eviction. It takes time. Do it, I said. Start the clock. I walked to her window. The city below was moving, oblivious to the war starting in my chest. And Karen, I added, watching the traffic. I want to sell the building. Karen choked on her water. The Lakeshore Tower? Arthur, that's your crown jewel. You built that with your own hands. You said that was Brandon's legacy. It's poisoned, I said. The word tasted bitter. The rot is in the walls. I want it gone. I want the cash. Arthur, you're making emotional decisions, she warned. I'm making a business decision, I corrected. An asset has become a liability. Liquidate it. Just then, my cell phone rang. It was my brother, Uncle Steve. Steve usually only called to talk about fishing or football. He was a simple man, a retired cop who lived a quiet life in Ohio. I'm busy, Steve, I answered. Arthur, shut up and listen, Steve said. His voice was tight, urgent. I had never heard him sound like that. What is it? It's about Jessica, Steve said. And it's about Marcus Thorne. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I'm listening. Not on the phone, Steve said. I drove up. I'm at the diner on 35th. Meet me now. I met Steve at the diner 20 minutes later. He was sitting in the back booth. A cup of black coffee, untouched in front of him. He looked older than I remembered. His face was lined with worry. I sat down. Spit it out, Steve. Steve looked around the diner to make sure no one was listening. He leaned in close. I still have friends on the force, Steve whispered. And I have friends in private security. When you told me about the wedding, about Thorne being there, I made some calls. He reached into his jacket pocket. Jessica didn't just meet Marcus Thorne at the wedding, Steve said. She used to work for him. I frowned. Work for him? She said she was a freelance consultant. She was his executive assistant, Steve corrected. 5 years ago, before she ever accidentally met Brandon at that coffee shop. My stomach turned. 5 years ago, Arthur, she was on Thorne's payroll until the day she married your son. It was Steve slid a folded piece of paper across the sticky table. It was a photocopy of an email. My buddy in digital forensics pulled this from an old server. Look at the date. I put on my glasses. The email was dated 3 months before Jessica met Brandon. From Jessica to Marcus Thorne. Subject, The Miller Project. My hands shook as I read the text. I'm in. The son is easy. He's soft, just like you said. Give me 2 years to lock him down, and I'll have access to the trust and the property portfolio. We will bleed the old man dry from the inside. I read the line again. The son is easy. It wasn't love. It never was. It was a heist. She owes Thorne money, Steve explained quietly. Gambling debt. Big debt from her days in Atlantic City. Thorne owns her. She promised him she'd pay it off with your money. I set the paper down. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a terrifying click. The expensive lifestyle. The desperation for cash. The mobile wallet comment. The isolation from my family. She wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a corporate spy. She was a thief, sent to dismantle my life. And my son, my poor, foolish son, was just the door she kicked down to get to the vault. He was the collateral damage. They played him, I whispered, and they played me. Steve reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. What are you going to do, Arthur? I looked at the email, then I looked at the photo of Marcus Thorne on my phone. I folded the paper neatly and put it in my pocket. I'm going to finish the game, I said. I stood up, but I'm changing the rules. I sat in the diner booth for a moment longer, staring at the email one last time before sliding it into my jacket pocket. It felt heavy against my chest, like a lead weight. The betrayal was total. It was absolute. It wasn't just that they didn't love me. It was that they had targeted me. I wasn't a father to them. I was a mark, a resource to be mined until it ran dry. I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table for Katie. Thanks, Steve, I said. My voice was rough. Watch your back, Arthur, Steve warned. Thorne plays dirty. If he knows you know. He won't know, I said, putting on my hat. Not until it's too late. I walked out into the cool Chicago night. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still wet, reflecting the neon signs in puddles of oil and water. I didn't go home. I couldn't go home. The silence of the suburbs would drive me mad. I drove to my office. The Miller Building. The lobby was empty, the security guard nodding as I passed. I took the private elevator to the top floor. The office was dark, lit only by the city lights below. I walked to the window and looked out. I had spent 40 years building this city. I knew how to pour concrete so it wouldn't crack. I knew how to reinforce steel so it wouldn't bend. But I had failed to build the one thing that mattered, a family that could stand up to the storm. I stood there, a silhouette against the glass, feeling the age in my bones. I felt tired, not sleepy, but a deep, soul-level exhaustion. Then my phone rang. The screen lit up the dark room. Brandon. I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Part of me wanted to throw the phone against the wall. But the other part, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike, the part that remembered his graduation, made me answer. Dad? His voice was weak, raspy. It sounded like he was in pain. What is it, Brandon? I asked. I kept my voice neutral. I'm at the hospital. My heart jumped. It was an automatic reflex, a biological switch that flips when your child is in danger. For a split second, the anger vanished, replaced by cold fear. What happened? I asked, gripping the phone. My chest, he wheezed. I could hear beeping in the background. Doctors say, heart failure. It's bad, Dad. It's really bad. Where are you? Northwestern Memorial, he said. Emergency room. I'm coming, I said, reaching for my keys. Wait, Brandon said quickly. Too quickly, Dad. There's an issue. I paused. My hand froze halfway to my pocket. What issue? Insurance, he cried. A sob racked his voice. It lapsed. We missed a payment with the wedding costs. They won't operate without a deposit. They won't operate, I asked slowly. Brandon, hospitals can't refuse life-saving surgery. It's a specialist, he stammered. A private specialist. They need cash for the procedure. Now, how much? $75,000. I went still. $75,000. It was a specific number. It was the exact price of the diamond engagement ring Jessica had demanded 2 years ago. I remembered seeing the receipt. Hold on, I said. Let me call the hospital billing department. I'll give them my credit card directly. No, Brandon shouted. The weakness in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by panic. No time, he said, lowering his voice to a whisper. Just wire it to my personal account. The one linked to the joint savings. Please, Dad. I don't want to die. I looked at the email in my pocket. I looked at the dark city, the beeping in the background. It was too rhythmic, too perfect. It sounded like a YouTube video of hospital sounds. Elena, I called out. I had forgotten she was still there, working late in the outer office. She appeared in the doorway, startled. "Track Brandon's phone," I whispered, covering the mouthpiece. Now, Elena didn't ask questions. She pulled out her tablet. We had a family plan. I paid the bill, so I had access to the GPS. She tapped the screen. A map of Chicago loaded. 5 seconds, she mouthed. I put the phone back to my ear. "Hang on, Brandon. I'm logging into the bank." "Hurry, Dad. My chest, it hurts." Elena turned the tablet toward me. A blue dot pulsed on the map. It wasn't at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It wasn't anywhere near the medical district. The dot was pulsing. 20 miles north. Location, Serenity Springs Spa and Resort. I stared at the dot. He wasn't dying. He wasn't in the ER. He was at a luxury spa. He was likely wearing a plush robe, sipping cucumber water and faking a heart attack to scam his own father out of 75 grand. I felt the last thread of connection snap. It made a sound in my head like a suspension cable parting under too much weight. The grief was gone. The pity was gone. I looked at Elena. She saw the map. Her expression hardened. I put the phone back to my ear. "Brandon," I said. "Dad, did you send it?" "I don't have the cash, Liquid," I lied. My voice was smooth. "Calm. It's late. The banks are closed. You have to do something." He screamed. "I have a buyer for the old work truck," I said. "The Ford F-350. He's paying $60,000. It's cash." "Sell it," Brandon yelled. "Sell it now." "I will," I said. "But the paperwork takes time. It will take 2 weeks to clear the funds." "2 weeks?" Brandon whined. I might be dead in 2 weeks." "You're a fighter, son," I said. "You hold on. I'll get you the money." There was a pause. I could hear him breathing. He wasn't wheezing anymore. He was calculating. "Okay," he said. I can try to stall them. 2 weeks. "You promise?" "Promise you will get exactly what you deserve," I said. I hung up. I looked at Elena. "He's at a spa," I said simply. Elena shook her head. "Disgusting." "Karen," I said, pointing to the intercom, "get her on the secure line. At this hour, she'll answer for me." 2 minutes later, Karen was on the speakerphone. "Arthur, accelerate the sale of the building," I said. "I want it closed." "And the eviction?" Karen asked. "Set the date," I said. "When do you want the sheriff to go in?" I looked at the calendar on my desk. 2 weeks, I said. On the day he expects the check. The trap was set. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. 2 weeks later, the day of the surgery. The eviction notice had been slid under the door of Unit 41 3 days ago. It was a legal document stamped by the sheriff's office. They ignored it. They didn't pack a single box. They didn't call a moving truck. In their arrogance, they assumed it was a bluff. They thought it was just another desperate attempt by a lonely old man to get their attention. They were so sure the truck money, the $60,000, was coming today. Instead of packing, they threw a party. It was billed as a launch party for Brandon's new venture, Apex Capital. A company that didn't exist. A company with no clients, no product, and no office. Just a website and a desire to look rich. I stood in the lobby of the building. I wasn't wearing my flannel shirt today. I wasn't wearing my work boots. I wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored from Italian wool. It was the suit I wore to board meetings. I wore my Patek Philippe watch, the one I usually kept in the safe. I carried my cane, not because I needed it, but because it had a heavy brass head. It was a symbol of authority. Gary, the building manager, was waiting for me by the elevators. He wore a grim expression. "We are ready, Mr. Chairman," he said. "Security is on standby in the stairwell." "Thank you, Gary," I said. "Let's go up." We stepped into the elevator. The numbers climbed. 10, 20, 30. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm. Thump, thump. I wasn't nervous. I felt a strange calm. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has wired the charges and is just waiting to press the button. The elevator chimed at the 41st floor. The doors slid open. The noise hit me instantly. Bass thumped through the floorboards. Laughter. The clink of glasses. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the scent of roasted duck. I stepped out. The penthouse was full. There were investors, minor local celebrities, and influencers taking selfies by the window. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Champagne bought with money they didn't have. Jessica was standing on a small stage in the living room, holding a microphone. She looked radiant. She looked triumphant. She saw me. Her smile dropped like a stone. Her eyes narrowed. "Security," she screamed into the microphone. Her voice screeched through the speakers, causing feedback that made the guests wince. "Get him out," she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Who let this old man in here?" The room went silent. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. All eyes turned to me. Brandon ran over. He was wearing a velvet blazer. He looked sweaty. "Dad, what are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "Go home. You're embarrassing me." He tried to push me toward the elevator. My personal bodyguard, a man named Russo who usually stayed in the shadows, stepped forward. He was 6'4" and wide as a doorframe. Russo placed a hand on Brandon's chest. "Do not touch him," Russo growled. Brandon stumbled back, shocked. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to me folding. "Dad," Brandon whispered. "What is this?" I didn't answer him. I snapped my fingers. Gary, the manager, walked over to the sound system. He pulled the plug. The music died. The silence that followed was heavy. It was thick with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gary announced, his voice projecting clearly. "This event is over. You can't do that," Jessica yelled, jumping down from the stage. She marched over to me, her face twisted in rage. "This is our apartment. We pay the rent." I stepped forward. The crowd parted for me, sensing the shift in power. I walked right up to Jessica. I looked her in the eye. "Actually," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You don't." I reached into my suit jacket. "You wanted the money, Brandon," I asked, not looking away from Jessica. "You wanted the $75,000 for your heart surgery." "Dad, not here," Brandon pleaded. "Please, just give me the check." "I brought something better," I said. I threw a stack of photos onto the buffet table. They fanned out across the silver platters. The wedding photos. The photos of Jessica and Marcus Thorne. And the photos from the spa. Brandon in a mud bath. Brandon playing tennis. Brandon very much alive and healthy at the exact moment he was claiming to be dying in the ER. The guests leaned in. Murmurs rippled through the room. "What is this?" Jessica whispered. She went pale. "And this," I said. I pulled out the email, the one Steve had given me. I held it up. From Jessica to Marcus Thorne, I read aloud. "The son is easy. Give me 2 years, and I'll have access to the trust. We will bleed the old man dry." I looked at the back of the room. Marcus Thorne was standing there, holding a scotch. He froze. He met my gaze. He saw the paper. He saw the look in my eye. He knew. Thorne didn't say a word. He set his glass down on a table and turned around. He walked out the front door without looking back. He knew a collapsed deal when he saw one. "He left you," I said to Jessica. "Your boss just walked out." Jessica trembled. Her mask was slipping. "I am Arthur Miller," I announced to the room. "I am the chairman of Miller Holdings." Gasps. People started to back away. They knew the name. Miller Holdings owned half the skyline. "I own this building," I said. "I own the walls you are standing within. I own the floor you are standing on." Brandon's knees gave out. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Dad, you own the building," he choked out. "I own 5 of them," I said. "Bought with the hard work and the money you were too ashamed to mention to your friends." I looked at Jessica. She looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by fear. "You said I wouldn't fit in with special people," I said, leaning in close. "You were right." I straightened my tie. "I don't fit in with liars." "Dad, please," Brandon begged. Tears were running down his face now. Real tears. "We're family. You can't do this." "Family?" I asked. I looked around the opulent room. I looked at the waste. I looked at the betrayal. "Family doesn't steal," I said. "Family doesn't fake a heart attack to rob a father." I pointed to the open door where the sheriff's deputies were now waiting. "Strangers pay rent," I said coldly, "and you are evicted. The room emptied with terrifying speed. It took less than 2 minutes for the friends, the influencers, and the hangers-on to vanish. They scattered like roaches when the kitchen light is flipped on. There were no goodbyes. No one offered Brandon a hand or Jessica a ride. They simply grabbed their coats, averted their eyes, and fled the contagion of failure. The silence that rushed back into the penthouse was heavy. It pressed against the glass walls. The smell of expensive perfume began to fade, replaced by the stale, sour odor of spilled champagne and panic. Brandon and Jessica stood alone in the center of the ruins of their reputation, the ruins of their scheme. I stood by the door, my hands clasped behind my back. Russo, my bodyguard, stood next to the sheriff's deputies. Their presence was a silent wall of authority. I checked my Patek Philippe. "You have 30 minutes, I said. My voice was devoid of anger. It was the voice of a site foreman reading a safety violation. "Whatever you can carry in 2 suitcases. That is all leaving with you." Jessica snapped out of her shock. Her face, streaked with mascara, contorted into a mask of entitlement. 30 minutes? That's illegal, she shrieked. She looked around frantically. "We have furniture. We have art. That Eames chair cost $6,000. "I know," I said calmly. "I have the receipt. It was charged to the corporate card on March 14th. I pointed to the chair. "That stays. The painting," she cried, pointing to the abstract canvas above the fireplace. "The gallery piece, paid for with the emergency fund," I corrected, "stays. My clothes," Brandon stammered. "My suits? The Italian suits?" I asked. "The ones you bought for the meetings that never happened? Those are company uniforms for a company that doesn't exist. They stay." I took a step forward. "You leave with what you owned before you met me," I said, "which by my calculation is nothing." Jessica let out a guttural scream of frustration. She grabbed a vase from the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered. Crash, sending porcelain shrapnel across the floor. "Property damage," I noted to the sheriff. "Add it to the bill. Start packing," I ordered. 28 minutes. The next half hour was the ugliest thing I have ever witnessed. It wasn't a family moving house. It was a scavenging operation. They ran to the bedroom. I could hear them screaming at each other. "You said he was soft," Brandon yelled. His voice cracked, high and pathetic. "You said he wouldn't do anything. You were supposed to handle him." Jessica screamed back. "You're his son. You're useless, Brandon. Utterly useless. Me? You're the one who emailed Thorne. Shut up. Just shut up and pack the jewelry." "He's taking the jewelry, Jessica. He has the receipts." I stood by the window, watching the city lights. I felt a profound detachment. I wasn't their father or their father-in-law anymore. I was the demolition expert. I was watching the charges detonate, bringing down a structure that had been condemned for years. They emerged from the bedroom with 2 suitcases. They were bulging, zippers strained. Jessica was wearing a tracksuit. She looked stripped, without the gown, without the arrogance, without the crowd to perform for. She looked common. She looked like the grifter she was. Brandon looked like a ghost. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Time's up," Gary said, checking his watch. "We need the elevator key," Jessica spat. "To get to the garage." I shook my head. "The garage is for residents," I said. "Your car, the Range Rover leased in my name, has already been repossessed. The tow truck came 10 minutes ago." Jessica's mouth fell open. "You took the car?" "I took my car," I corrected. I pointed to the service door, the heavy steel door I had stood behind 2 weeks ago. "You're taking the service elevator," I said, "and you're walking out the back. Like servants?" Jessica hissed. "Like trespassers," I said. They walked toward the door. The sound of the suitcases rolling over the hardwood floor was a low rumble. "Rawr, rawr." At the door, Brandon stopped. He hesitated. He turned to look at me. His eyes were red. For a second, I saw the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters. "Dad," he whispered, "where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him. I felt a flicker of the old pain, the phantom limb of fatherhood. But then I remembered the mobile wallet. I remembered the fake heart attack. I remembered the text to Thorne. "You're a self-made man, Brandon. I said softly. Go make yourself. I didn't blink. He lowered his head. He turned and walked through the steel door. Jessica followed him, not looking back. Gary stepped forward and closed the door. Clang. The sound echoed through the empty penthouse. It was a heavy final sound, like a prison cell closing, or a vault locking. I was alone. I looked around the massive, silent apartment. It was filled with things, statues, rugs, electronics, but it was empty of life. I didn't feel sad. I checked my chest. No, the crack wasn't hurting anymore. I felt clean. It felt like walking onto a job site after the demolition crew has finished. The rot was gone. The dangerous, unstable structure had been leveled. The dust was settling. I walked to the balcony door and locked it. I was done here. 30 days later, I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, one last time. The wind whipped around the 41st floor, carrying the scent of the lake. The apartment behind me was completely empty. The Eames chair was gone. The abstract painting was gone. Even the expensive biometric lock had been replaced with a standard deadbolt. It was just a shell of glass and steel now. The new owners, a Weddin tech couple from Silicon Valley, were moving in tomorrow. They were excited. They saw a view. I only saw a battlefield. I looked down at my hand. I was holding a cashier's check. Pay to the order of Arthur Miller. Amount: $4,500,000 in dollars. $4.5 million. The price of the crown jewel. I ran my thumb over the numbers. Years ago, this check would have made me feel powerful. It would have felt like a high score. Now it just felt like paper. It felt like blood money, harvested from a wound that was finally starting to heal. I wasn't keeping it. I had already signed the transfer papers. I wasn't putting this back into Miller Holdings. I wasn't buying a yacht. I was establishing the Miller Scholarship for Trades. Every dime, all $4.5 million, was going into a trust. It would pay for welding school, carpentry apprenticeships, and electrical certification for kids from the South Side, kids who wanted to work with their hands, kids who knew the value of $1 because they had to sweat for it, kids like I used to be. The elevator chimed. It was Elaine. She walked out onto the balcony, clutching a manila envelope against her chest to keep it from blowing away in the wind. The wire transfer is complete, Arthur, she said. The scholarship fund is active as of this morning. Good, I said, tucking the check into my pocket. Make sure the press release focuses on the students. I don't want my face on it. Understood. Elena hesitated. She tapped the envelope she was holding. I also have the final report from the private investigator, she said softly, regarding the former tenant. I stared out at the gray horizon of Lake Michigan. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me wanted to leave them in the past, like a bad dream. But I needed the closure. Tell me, I said. Elena opened the file. Jessica didn't stay long. She left Brandon 3 days after the eviction. She claimed irreconcilable differences due to financial instability. I let out a short, dry laugh. Of course she did. She was seen in Miami last week. Elena continued. She's dating a hedge fund manager. He's 65. Poor guy, I murmured. He doesn't know he's the next meal. And Brandon? I asked. The question felt heavy in my mouth. Elena flipped a page. She smiled. Just a little. He's still in Chicago. He's living in a studio apartment in Rogers Park. It's above a laundromat. Is he working? Yes, Elena said. Do you want to see? She handed me a photo. I looked at it. I stared at it for a long time. The wind pulled at the edges of the paper, but I held it tight. Okay, I whispered. Okay. I handed the photo back to her. Thank you, Elena. You can go. I'll lock up. She nodded and left. I stood there for one more minute. I touched the cold railing. I didn't feel the ghost of my son here anymore. I didn't feel the shame of the mobile wallet. I turned around, walked through the empty living room, and stepped out the front door. I locked it. Click. It was the sound of a book closing. I drove my truck to the north side of the city. It was raining again, a slow, steady drizzle that made the city look like a black and white photograph. I pulled up to the curb across the street from a small coffee shop called the Grant. I killed the engine. I sat in the cab. The wipers stopped, raindrops blurring the windshield. Through the glass storefront, I could see him, Brandon. He was wearing a green apron. He was holding a wet rag. He was wiping down a table, where a group of college students had just left a mess. He looked tired. He had lost weight. The soft, doughy look of the launch party was gone. His face was leaner. There were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't wearing the Italian suit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I watched him work. He missed a spot on the table. He stopped, went back, and scrubbed it again. He didn't complain. He didn't call for a servant. He just did the work. A customer walked up to the counter. A woman in a rush. I saw Brandon smile at her. It wasn't the fake arrogant smile he used to give investors. It was a humble smile, a service smile. He took her order. He made the coffee. He handed it to her. I gripped the steering wheel. Every instinct in my body wanted to get out of the truck. I wanted to walk in there, throw a wad of cash on the counter and say, "Come home, son. It's okay. I'll fix it." I could buy this coffee shop. I could buy the whole block. I could make his pain go away in a second. But I froze. If I went in there, I would be the mobile wallet again. I would be robbing him of the one thing he actually needed. Consequence, he was wiping tables. He was earning minimum wage. For the first time in his life, he was a man standing on his own 2 feet. He looked miserable, but he also looked real. I watched him for 5 more minutes. I memorized the way he looked. "Keep scrubbing, kid," I whispered to the windshield. "It's the only way to get the stain out." I didn't open the door. I reached for my phone instead. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hello?" A voice answered on the second ring. "Steve," I said. "Arthur? Everything okay?" "Yeah, Steve. Everything is fine." I looked at my son one last time, then put the truck in gear. "Is the boat ready?" I asked. I could hear the smile in Steve's voice. "The boat is always ready, Arthur. You know that. How's the weather down there?" "Perfect," Steve said. "The bass are biting on the river." "When are you coming?" I pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. And I looked back at the coffee shop. "I'm coming home," I said. "I'll be there by dinner. We'll have a cold one waiting for you." "Sounds good." I hung up the phone. I drove toward the highway, leaving the skyline of Chicago behind me. The skyscrapers, the deals, the betrayals, they all faded into the rearview mirror. I rolled down the window. The cold air rushed in, filling the cab. I wasn't a wallet. I wasn't a shadow. I wasn't a victim. I was Arthur. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was free. I've learned that life, much like construction, is about knowing when to pour the foundation and when to let the cement dry. It's been a hard road to walk, but the view is clearer now than it's ever been. If this journey of rebuilding resonated with the steel in your own backbone, and you want to walk the next few miles with me, I'd be honored to have you along. Leave a like if you're still standing, and subscribe so we can share the next chapter together. The river is calling, and I've got a feeling the fishing is going to be good.